Hello and welcome to the Strategies for Self-Care and Caregiver Advocacy with Providers. We are so excited about this program. In the past, at the American Association for the Study of Liver Disease conference, we would always talk about advocacy in terms of patient advocacy, coming to Congress, coming to our nation's capital, sharing our stories. But because of all that patients have gone through, particularly during COVID, my colleague who helped envision this program, Ryan Clary, and I felt that this year it might make sense to have patient advocacy focused on the patient, their challenges and struggles, perhaps with their health care, perhaps with insurance companies, perhaps with a hospital system. So we are very excited today to have three speakers who are going to give their thoughts on this subject. And of course, we want to be able to have you all, both online and in person, ask questions. So I would like to announce all three speakers at this time. To my left is Beth Lehman. Beth is a patient herself. I think you will be amazed by her journey and look forward to her presentation. And Beth comes to us from Atlanta. We also have Melissa Tolzin, who comes from the proud Midwest in Kansas. And Melissa has been a caregiver for not just one family member, not just two family members, but with three family members. And she will have some insights that I think will be so helpful. And last but not least, we are so honored to have Dr. Sue Wang. And I'm guessing many of you have heard from Sue throughout this meeting because Sue is an unbelievable medical professional, but also a patient herself. So it's such a privilege to have her on our panel. So with that, I am going to turn it over to our first speaker, which is Beth, sharing her patient story.
Good morning. My name is Beth. I'm an alcoholic. My name is Beth. I'm a liver cancer. My name is Beth. I'm a liver transplant. Yeah, I got the trifecta, the triple crown of liver diseases. I was originally diagnosed with alcoholic cirrhosis in 2019. As we know, there's a lot of guilt and shame that comes with this. So with that diagnosis being in December, I didn't even tell my family nor my husband and spent the holidays with that. Nor did I stop drinking. That's the other important part. So turn of the year came and I started getting so ill that I couldn't hide it anymore. So we started going down the path of admitting to me and myself and my family what I had done, and also taking that and taking charge. No more in the past. We're going to move forward. We're going to treat this disease. So I go in for my wellness check. You know, you have to be fit to have a transplant. So go in, and I thought everything was hunky-dory. I was joking with the nurses. And then they come in and they say, well, wait, we have found cancer. We found 5 tumors. So with that, the transplant kind of went on hold and we treated cancer. I went through 3 rounds of radiation, the Y90 radiation, where they actually do inject the radiation directly into your tumors. I ended up getting very sick with that, and eventually made it around to April 19th of 2021. Sorry, April 18th. That is the day, it was a Sunday, and I just had come to the realization that I couldn't fight anymore. This was it, and I was done. The cancer had just ravaged me. I was down to 88 pounds at the time. And I summoned my family to my home, and on that Sunday, my parents, along with me and my husband, we planned my funeral. And they left. They live about an hour and a half from me. And about 2 hours later, I get the phone call. We have a liver, and it's got your name on it. So next morning, went in, and 6 a.m., they said, okay, we're on track. Let's do this. Waited. They come in finally. They said, well, you know, your liver's coming from out of state, and it's actually stuck in a ground hold at the airport. So I'm like, oh, okay, great. There it is, circling right above my hospital room. So finally went into surgery at 7:23, came out at 11:53. It was one of the fastest transplant surgeries my surgeon had done, and he said it went great. I woke up in ICU, and I immediately could tell a difference. I felt better. I said, this can't be. And the word that came to my head was rebirth. That's not a word that I would use in normal conversation. And I said, okay, this is a sign. You know, I'm going to take this and run with it. So with that, I was moved out of ICU in about 6 to 8 hours. I was a little foggy at the time, so I'm not quite sure the time, but I was up and eating within 2 days and was ready to leave the hospital, except for, you know, anytime you have a surgery at the hospital, you got to have that one thing before you leave, and that's the bowel movement. Had not done that yet, so I ended up leaving the hospital in 5 days, which for a liver transplant was pretty miraculous. So I get home, and I'm recuperating, and I'm getting well, and I'm saying, how am I going to pay this forward? And I'm thinking back, and I'm like, you know, I went through a journey that had many, many separate silos, and for other people going through this and people that I had talked to just in waiting rooms and things like that, I kind of wanted to share my philosophy on how I kept it going and how I managed it. It's hard to say that a transplant and an illness has to be managed, but it does. And it all came in the form of a book. I started writing in books, and I took it to every doctor that I had, and I wrote everything down. I could tell one doctor what the other doctor said and tell the other doctor that, oops, no, can't go on that medication because it'll interfere with this. I took charge of my own illness, and also with the post-care. It takes a long time to recover from a transplant, especially when you had gone down as much in weight as I had. So over the course of my post-treatment, my husband's companies changed insurance companies. So I found myself not only having questions from other patients about how I made it through this miraculous journey, but also on how I dealt with insurances, because when we did make that change in February, I filled out a whole bunch of paperwork, 20 pages, so-and-so. This is the procedures I've had. This is the medication I'm on. Went to go and do my first CAT scan or MRI for my care, and they said, this is not covered. We don't think you had a transplant. So, yeah. After a few choice words maybe and a fist or two through the wall, I said, you know, I filled out a 20-page questionnaire. What's going on here? So I ended up using the book that I had written everything in to summarize my transplant journey for an insurance company. Now, you know, that's not really supposed to happen. It's not supposed to be that way. But what I have tried to do is just talk to patients, and when you're in the depths of a illness like that, and when you become so weak, and with liver disease, you get a lot of HE experiences, so you really lose your cognitive abilities for basic things, and trying to do the management is hard. So I tell patients that don't be afraid to ask the question. You know, we all say that, it's all been heard, but when the doctor comes into the room and he says, well, I think your AST and your ALT are good, but your alk phosphates are a little low and your sodium's too high and your potassium's got to do this, and then you're like, what questions did I have for the doctor? I can't remember anything now. So write it down in your books and write down everything. You know, if you cough, you are the patient and you have the right to ask those questions, and you have a right to get the answers. I then the one thing that you need to do is that when you get those answers, write them down and talk to your doctor about them as well. Because these doctors are doing this day in and day out, and they don't know that they're just telling you the same stuff that they've told everybody else, and maybe you don't understand. My husband is a lawyer, and we laugh and say he's not allowed to talk to me in words that contain 4 syllables or more, because I have a hard time understanding him sometimes. And I made that joke and said the same thing for my doctor. So you need to just take into your own abilities, how do you understand things? For me, it was a book and questions. But do you need pictures drawn? Do you need, somebody else to come in and explain it in less medical jargon? Find out what you need and do that, because if you don't have your answers, number one, you're not going to be satisfied with how you're going down the path, and number two, you might not be feeling that great and be stuck in the downs that is liver disease, but not have any answers. That was one of the worst things that I went through, is if they told me, I'll give you one example, is that when they did find the cancer, the liver cancer the tumors had to be 2 centimeters or more before they could treat it. They found my tumors at 1.7 and 1.8 centimeters. They said, go home and wait 3 months and we'll see how this grows and then we'll treat it. So I was okay with that because I knew why. I knew why we were waiting. Had he just told me go home and wait, I wouldn't have been okay with that. So in conclusion, I just really want people to know that your way can be the highway, for lack of a better term, but you need to set your standards, understand how you can understand what you need for your medical journey, and focus on that and work with your doctors. And get yourself a book, because it's amazing. At the end of my journey, and your journey's never ended, let me say that, but one of my last appointments with my hepatologist before he retired, he saw me coming down the hall with the book. And he took the book from me, and he opened it up, and he's like, okay, I'm gonna write your answers to this. I'm just gonna do it. And he did it while we were talking. It became second nature to him. So, and you can also use this for looking back at your journey. I'm looking back at this right now and remembering stories to tell you guys, and also remembering stories that were good and bad, and things that I can write down and give to the next group of patients that are behind me. And you can also do it for insurance companies, but that's not near as much fun to talk about. So, thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, Beth. And we're going to be hearing from all of our panelists with questions, both online and here. So I'm sure many have questions for Beth. So I'm now delighted to introduce Melissa Tolzien from Kansas. Melissa, when we first heard her story at the American Liver Foundation, we were blown away, because Melissa has really been beyond the call as a caregiver, and so I think you'll enjoy hearing from her. So,
Hello, I'm Melissa Tolzien. My liver disease journey is very unique because it spans 3 generations. I'm an advocacy ambassador for the American Liver Foundation and a member of the National Kidney Foundation's Kidney Advocacy Committee. I advocate in memory of my grandparents, Linus and Ira Sanchez. My caregiving journey began when my grandmother was diagnosed with end-stage liver disease, idiopathic unknown cause cirrhosis, in October 2012. I assume my grandmother must have had a genetic predisposition to liver disease because her mother also passed away from liver disease. Cirrhosis is typically stereotyped as an alcoholic's disease, but neither of my grandmothers ever drank a day in their lives. My grandmother bravely battled end-stage liver disease from 2012 to 2014. She fearlessly fought her disease until her last breath. Second opinions. Prior to my grandmother's diagnosis, she was always tired and sleeping. I overlooked the signs because I assumed she was exhausted due to her age and because she worked over 40+ hours a week. On her days off, she would sleep the entire day. I finally realized something was definitely not right and I encouraged her to see her primary care physician. After getting the runaround for quite some time, she was finally sent to a specialist, and she was seen by a gastroenterologist. Her gastroenterologist gave her no immediate answers, and I rapidly grew impatient. I spoke to my grandfather, and we proposed a plan to try to get answers. We decided as a family we wanted to get a second opinion. I sent her to Texas for a second opinion. After reviewing her records, she was diagnosed that very day with end-stage liver disease and given a life expectancy of 0 to 6 months to live. When she returned to Kansas, she had an appointment with her gastroenterologist. She was yet again given the same diagnosis and given 0 to 6 months to live. As a caregiver, you must advocate for your loved one. I would advise educating yourself on your loved one's disease, their diagnosis, and their prognosis. Always watch for the signs and symptoms and help them be aware of that as well. I would always highly recommend getting second and third opinions. You need to discuss your loved one's wishes and how they want to proceed. If they choose to get a second opinion, help facilitate that. Be prepared. Have your questions written down for the provider in advance. I always typed out my questions, and I had one copy to read from and one copy that I provided for the provider so he could read from as well. You get about 20 minutes with your provider, so please make great use of your time. Help keep your loved one on task when talking to the provider. Take notes, get the physician's permission, and record the conversation to listen to later. I bought my grandmother a voice recorder, and I would always get the physician's permission first, but then she could listen to the conversation later when she wasn't in such a stage of shock, and then she could really absorb the information. I feel like it was very fundamental for her. The voice recorder allowed her to re-listen to our conversations with the providers at a later time, and then she was able to really take it all in. That would be the biggest struggle I would say that she had, was every time we'd go into the office visits, she kind of just shut down mentally, and I can understand that because it is shocking. It's very shocking to your psyche. So what I would always do for her is I would ask all the questions. So that would be, as a caregiver, that's where you step in and you step up when they can't do what they need to do. So always ask questions, ask questions, ask questions. Listen to your intuition and always go with your gut. If you're referred to a provider that doesn't want to listen to your questions and concerns, then you need to find another provider. You really have to look at the patient-provider relationship as just that, a relationship. A positive patient-provider relationship should foster security for the patient. Learning that you have liver disease is catastrophic mentally. If you do not feel comfortable with your provider, you will never be able to have assurance in your care. Prescription drug costs. Medication to treat liver disease can be very expensive. Some liver disease medications, such as Xifaxan, can be tremendously expensive. My grandmother had Medicare and Blue Cross Blue Shield as her supplemental insurance, and Xifaxan was still $600 out of pocket for her every month. I spoke to her gastroenterologist and I inquired about receiving medication samples. Financially, that was such a blessing. I would also suggest contacting the manufacturer directly to see what discounts they have available to you. Research, research, research. Always do your research. The role of caregiving is the most challenging yet rewarding job that I have ever had. It is a selfless act of love. I never regretted being my grandmother's caregiver. It requires an immense amount of strength, and you are their rock and their support system. Remain positive and always celebrate small wins. Be proud of yourself and your loved one. The most important thing to remember is to never give up. Advocating. Prior to my grandmother's passing, I spoke to her gastroenterologist and I expressed my substantial concern regarding my own potential health risk for liver disease. I was tremendously worried that I may also have a genetic predisposition to cirrhosis. My grandmother was at the end of her life, and I wanted to know if there was any genetic testing that we could have done to find out if I was also a carrier. Her gastroenterologist assured me that my grandmother's liver disease was idiopathic, unknown cause, and informed me that there was no genetic testing available. My gut always told me that it was genetic. In 2021, my mother was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. She was given methotrexate for treatment of her RA. She suffered an allergic reaction and went into respiratory distress. She had to be put on life support. She was diagnosed with interstitial lung disease. She was on life support for 22 days. By the grace of God, she survived, but she had a long road to recovery. I got her the best care team at KU Medical Center. After an extensive amount of testing, she was also diagnosed with liver disease. Her pulmonologist asked her many odd questions. At what age did your hair turn gray? What age did your mother's hair turn gray? Was your grandmother's hair gray at a young age? I found that to be shocking, and it really, to me, as a caregiver, it made no sense why a pulmonologist would be asking those type of questions. But little did I know, and I was about to find out. He began to explain the research discovery linking certain types of autoimmune liver diseases to short telomere syndromes. Short telomere syndromes are accelerated aging syndromes, often caused by inheritable genes, resulting in short telomere lengths. As a consequence, organ systems with increased cell turnover such as skin, bone marrow, and lungs, and gastrointestinal tract are commonly affected. I requested that my mother be genetically tested for short telomere syndrome, and she was positive. That is why it is so detrimental that we continue to urge Congress and the Senate to increase federal funding for liver disease research. Due to the advancements in medical research, my family now have answers to why 3 generations have been gravely affected by liver disease. I advocate in memory of our angel Ira. My grandmother was an outstanding example of resilience and perseverance, and I carry her strength within me. Even though she's now in heaven, she's my source of inspiration. I am sharing 3 generations of my family's liver disease stories to help educate and advocate for all liver patients and their families. My caregiving journey has made me the person that I am today. It's been influential in my legislative initiatives. It's been monumental in raising liver awareness. The experience I've acquired through years of caregiving has only fueled my passion for advocacy. I now have a career as a patient advocate for a health care system, and I pray others are inspired to join our fight against liver disease. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Sorry, we had a few challenges. We were showing family of Melissa. She's here representing all of them, and clearly there's a common theme of liver disease in generations. And so she is passionate about her story, and she's passionate about sharing it with others. So, okay, so now we have a next speaker. Last but not least, Dr. Sue Wang. And again, so grateful for all she does for our community.
Thanks, Lorraine. So Ryan had asked me if I would be involved with this, and I was really honored to do so. And he had said, feel free to share about what you as a provider thinks providers can do to really help advocate for patients' care. But he knows I'm a dual citizen, I'm a liver patient and a doctor too, and he said, if you feel comfortable, please share your story as well. And so I think I don't think I could do any better than what you guys did in terms of talking about what patients can do for themselves. And I feel like we need to bottle up everything you said and, have it as something that doctors can provide to their patients, as a tool, like, you're allowed to do all this. I think a lot of times they feel like they're just recipients of instructions and you just need to be compliant, but really you are in this driving, you're driving the steering wheel, right? You're turning it, and I think we need to empower patients to feel that way. So, I think I want to summarize really what you guys are saying in terms of the patient level, like writing out your questions, like asking if you can record the call. I think all these things are so important. People come in and I think they hear big news and then they tune out, and then they can't process it, and it takes a couple visits before they can ask all their questions. So I think that's really important. And bring your medical records. I mean, I think unfortunately our healthcare system is very broken in terms of medical records, and what you do at one doctor doesn't get translated to the other one. And you just need to be assumed you are your own medical records department. And so I always tell people, keep a file, print it out, write it down. I think your book idea is amazing. It's a really good idea. And then also bring a friend or ally to your visits. family member, because I think it's very hard once you get home to try to say everything that the doctor just said to you and answer people's questions. And even if they can't come physically, I have a lot of patients now who will let me dial somebody in. Can we do this over FaceTime with my spouse or whoever? And they can be at work. That's the amazing thing. Now that is like with telehealth, that's way more acceptable now to do that. And then I think peer support obviously is really important, finding other patients just like you. So I actually want to share my experience. So I'm living with Hep B, but I actually was kind of more thrust into like the patient space when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, which is required surgery. And I all of a sudden found myself as a physician on the other side. And I think I'm kind of speaking to physicians as well, because part of the title here is self-care, right? And so I found that physicians are horrible with self-care. I think we somehow think we're like above or something, like it's not going to happen to us, or we're just so busy. Everything else is so much more important than my self-care. Getting my mammogram, my colonoscopy, my own visit. I mean, you talk to most doctors, and it's appalling. Like, we tell people to go do this and this and this, and then if you ask them if they've done their mammograms and colonoscopies, I mean, some are really good, but you definitely have some that are like, oh, I'm just too busy. I'm a mom, I'm a patient. My patient needs are often like up there. I don't want to cancel patients, and you feel like you'd be irresponsible if you don't do that. But I mean, if you cancel patients, but it's just so important. We really can't do a good job of taking care of other people if we don't take care of ourselves. So even when I had my mammogram and they had said it was suspicious and I needed additional testing, my first thought was like, I don't have time for this. Like, when am I going to get another mammogram? It's okay. I'll do it again in like 6 months. And my fellow doctor was like, are you crazy? You would never tell a patient to like, it says suspicious, but somehow like, we're not great at like being objective about ourselves. And so I did listen to her, and I ended up needing a biopsy and then just kept having to do that stuff. But it took me a while because I was still trying to balance it with not canceling my patients. When I found out it was cancer and I needed a mastectomy, well, actually I had to decide. They basically said I could either do a lumpectomy or mastectomy. And I think, this is where even in breast cancer, and I think this comes up with liver cancer a lot of it is patient preference, right? Coming up with all these things. And I had some family history. And I told my doctor, I said, I'm actually really comfortable with doing a bilateral mastectomy. I've got 2 family members with breast cancer, and my father had prostate cancer. And they said, why don't you go do some genetic testing? It was negative. There were no mutations besides BRCA. I mean, there was not BRCA nor any other mutations. And they were like, you're fine doing a lumpectomy, you really don't need a mastectomy. And I said, I'm really not comfortable with that because as a minority, I know a lot of these genetic testing has not been done in populations that represent me. So I do think that's really important as a patient for you to say, those things are not 100%. I mean, you're talking about genetic testing too. It's an evolving field. 10 years from now, they might find mutations that actually mean something for somebody of your background. And so I was pretty confident just to move forward, and they were very supportive. And I think a lot of physicians, if they know that this is what you want, they will support you. So yeah, and I think I was so much like diving into the data. I think the brain part of me was just like, well, what do the guidelines say? What are the risks? And it wasn't until literally the day before my surgery, it hit me that this was actually happening to me, my body, and that was the first time I was like, oh, I actually need to grieve a little bit, like realize like my body's gonna be changing, and it just made me realize as physicians, we often minimize our disease, and it's like for any healthcare provider, any provider. I think all of us who feel like our other jobs are so important is to allow ourselves to experience it and feel the loss and give ourselves the space that we need to really just experience it as a person. So, and even after surgery, my recovery was a little harder than I thought it was going to be, and I was very frustrated with that because a lot of times you just feel like you try harder, you should get the results. I think as a physician, it's like you study hard, you get the results, and when you're recovering, there's nothing else you can do except recover harder, which is like rest more, right? And I had a really hard time with that, just resting. And so one thing I learned is just to realize that your body is going to heal at its own pace and to allow yourself that ability to do that, and be okay if you don't follow exactly what the doctor said. Oh, you should be up, you should be driving by 2 weeks, you should be back to work 6 to 8 weeks. And I did do that, but I didn't realize that I wasn't going to be 100%. So what I tell patients now is post-surgery, post-procedure, expect it to be a slow, it may, depending on, everybody's got a different speed, but it will be, you may be 80%, you may be 50%, but give yourself the time to recover, and it may be a year, which is kind of what I felt, a year before I really felt like back to myself. So, I think a lot of it is expectations. So I think as physicians, there was a whole session yesterday about provider-patient communication and just really hearing from patients what it is that's helpful for you to hear as you progress. And I think as physicians, we often focus on outcomes, probability, but in terms of your day-to-day, we don't do a great job of it. And we don't often have the time. So what I found is my doctor, even as I was going through reconstruction, the plastic surgeon would be in there for like 5 minutes. But then his nurse, I would really be able to sit down and ask her, but what about this, and tell me more. And so I was really happy that I could find somebody part of the team who was able to answer all my questions. So that's what I would say is, there's usually somebody who's in the team who's got a little bit more time who kind of can answer your questions. And I hear that in my practice too, that my receptionist often is counseling patients. And she's really smart, so I'm really appreciative that she can help navigate patients sometimes with some of their questions. And I think in terms of physicians as advocates, so much of like the amazing work I've seen physician advocates even here is just using our voice. So whatever physicians are listening to this, I think we don't realize how much our voice carries. So in terms of like Hep C, like we talk a lot about drug coverage, right? Insurance coverage of drugs. And there are, physicians who really out of their, have volunteer time to serve on state drug utilization boards for Medicaid, and their testimonies make a difference. Obviously going to Congress and lobbying or like visiting your congressperson, all those things make a difference. And I feel like it's the combo of having a patient and a physician at the table with these decision makers is like the 1-2 punch. Like you got the data, but you got the personal story. And I think that's the partnership we need. And I think AASLD is doing more of that every year when they have Hill Day. They bring a patient along with the physicians to talk to Congress members. So it's been great to see this patient track growing within AASLD, and I think our stories are so powerful. And I really hope all the physicians get a chance to hear them because all your stories really make our job so much more meaningful. I think what you guys do, us hearing the feedback, is like antidote to burnout because there's so much physician burnout at this time, and hearing these success stories is really incredible. I think that's it. I've just heard some really cute ideas or like really nice ideas. Another doctor that who is here a lot, Cammie Graham, which many of you know, she talks about how she does a lot of personal touches with her patients. So when her patients are cured of hepatitis C, she actually writes them a handwritten note to congratulate them. And I just think that's amazing just to have like that extra touch. And we do like a certificate of completion that we give them, like a certificate they can take around, because obviously their Hep C antibody is still positive, so sometimes that can raise a lot of questions. But I think it's interesting how you can be innovative, right? And not just be this like sterile, coming in the room. And that additional kind of personal touch really makes a difference in patients, and it makes our jobs really meaningful as providers. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wang. And I had known about the liver disease. I didn't know about your latest journey.
Yeah,
So the
during
fact that
COVID,
you
yeah.
shared that with us is we appreciate. Okay, we have quite a few questions, so I will dive right in. So first question, let's see here. How about the caregiver is probably the least thought about person. How often we ask the patient how they are doing, but we forget the caregiver. Maybe you all wish to comment, and we'll start with our caregiver in Melissa.
I was honestly never asked how I was doing. My mental and physical health did decline. You don't take care of yourself because you put them in front of everything. It did cost me a lot, but my grandparents, they raised me, they loved me, they were always my inspiration in life. So it's what I tell people now is if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of them successfully. And so, I mean, I didn't go to any of my appointments, dental appointments, no checkups. We do have breast cancer in our family as well, and I started doing mammograms at a younger age than typical people do, and I didn't do any of those. I canceled all of my stuff, and you get so engulfed in their care that it's from the morning. I mean, I was a caregiver for her 24 hours a day, and I always suggest people just first take care of yourself. Mentally, I would say I struggled more mentally than physically. I never slept because she was up all night long, all day. Like, her days and her nights were confused. She was always confused. She always wanted to get up, and so I had to always be watching her so she didn't fall, and ask for help. You get to a point where you feel like you're on your own. Hire help. Do whatever you can do to give yourself that break.
How about you, Beth, with,
I'm
I
gonna
assume you're-
steal your mic here
Yeah.
for a second. For those of you that don't know, for Donate Life America, promoting the organ donation registry, it is National Caregivers Month. So we want to make sure that all of the caregivers are given a little special treat. But my primary caregiver was my husband, and the hardest part for me was to see him have to take over daily activities. The laundry, emptying the dishwasher, things like that. And I realized that I never said thank you. And afterwards he has said, those 2 words would have been great, but just acknowledge what I'm doing, because it is hard, and he was getting the same information I was getting too. He was trying to digest the fact that I was dying, and still take care of the house and 2 cats and litter boxes and all that other good stuff. So, it is something that needs to be remembered, and I think that they all deserve a spa day, really.
So good. And from the physician perspective, how best to
Yeah.
handle the caregiver?
I see a lot of caregivers, and I always worry about them because I think they just keep going. They're so brave, and what I often will say, it's okay. Like, I feel like sometimes they need permission to rest, and there's a lot of guilt, and we have patients who have Alzheimer's, and I just know you cannot do this 24/7. It is really actually not healthy, and so I feel like it's important to recommend. Home health aid, can you do something, and can you have a day, some sort of respite, have somebody else come in for a couple hours, that way you can go do your thing. And you can tell these people, like, it just helps to have some sort of support and be given that permission that you're not a bad caregiver for doing that. And I think we need to support caregivers that way to take care of themselves as well.
And the caregivers are gonna be the first people to say, I don't need anything.
Yeah.
I don't need
Oh, yeah.
that. So you're gonna have to, it's nice if you plan something special for them so that they'll accept it. You need to get them to
Yeah.
accept it too.
And I may just weigh in on that. I may be leading a national liver foundation, but my first job is caregiver. I've been married to a man who's had a chronic disease for 63 years. He spent 140 days in the hospital this year. Wow. And I have to say, we as the American Liver Foundation want to do more for caregivers because there is such a need, and I sure see that firsthand even in my own journey. Even after COVID, things are different after COVID in a hospital setting. Mm-hmm. And caregivers can't be in the hospital when doctors do rounds in the morning because of visiting hours being so much later because of COVID. You can't meet with nurses on shift changes like you used to do at 7 o'clock because visiting hours are over. So there are challenges. You have to be assertive. There's no doubt about it when you're a caregiver. So you need to encourage that of your caregivers. So here is a question. What is your experience interacting with patient advocacy groups regarding new treatments and or clinical trials?
Basically, now that I found out about our family's genetic mutation, I tell everybody I can about it. Her gastroenterologist her local one, had never even heard about it. So I'm trying to myself. I don't know if you've seen pictures of my sister up there. She at 19 went gray, so that's a marker. So I'm trying to get us into a research study in Colorado. I'm working with my mother's pulmonologist to do that because I'm eager to see if we also carry the mutation, and that would be 4 generations.
So you're getting a lot of the clinical trial information from your physicians?
Yeah, from her physician.
Okay. How about you, Beth? Were you at all eligible, or maybe not?
No, the only thing that they really looked at me for was, COVID was just nothing we'd ever seen before. And I got sick in March of 2020. So it was right at the beginning of COVID. And the one thing that they did look at me for was I had my second COVID vaccine on April 15th of 21, and then had a transplant on the 19th. So they did a couple of little studies on how, was that vaccine even effective, because I did have to get blood during the surgery and things like that. So I don't know if anything ever came of it, but he told me that they were looking at that for something. But with the one other thing, I guess, with that is with livers and needing to get a transplant, we did say that we would accept a Hep C positive liver. So had that happened, I would have been part of some testing and all that, but thank goodness it did not happen.
And since the question was specific to patient advocacy groups, I know many patient advocacy groups, including the one I'm associated with. We do promote on our websites clinical trials, but it's clinicaltrials.gov is an important resource. It's a little complicated. There's also something called Anecdote that you can go into this service, and they draw everything from clinicaltrials.gov, but it's much more user-friendly. So you can say, I want to be a part of a clinical trial within a 30-mile radius. This is what I have. This is what I need, and all kinds of studies will pop up. So you might keep that in mind. Do you have any other thoughts, Dr. Wang, in terms of resources?
Well, I was going to say, I think the patient advocacy groups are really important for collating that information for patients. I mean, it's great when your doctor knows about it, but so many doctors are not plugged into clinical trials. And, so I think your centralized source, Hep B Foundation does it for Hep B trials, and I think that's a really important role, and to help encourage and answer questions that people have. I know, so I learned a lot from the breast cancer organizations, and they are so active. When I was part of the peer support, and you look at any breast cancer website, breastcancer.org was the one I used, I was like, oh my gosh, we need to do a better job with liver disease too, because the problem is there's no stigma with breast cancer. So people are out there sharing, and there's so much support, and I just thought, we could be transformative if we do a little bit more. And of course they have a lot of money, but it kind of really helps. But I was inspired by that, and I could see that, we can be doing that too. And, a lot of you guys are already doing that, so.
All great information. I wanted to have my colleague who helped to put this together, Ryan Clary, but wasn't able to join us today, but he's online. He has a question for Beth. There's a question in the room.
Yes.
Okay, I'm so sorry. Why don't we take the question? Ryan, you gotta hold on, but you're coming soon. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. This is also a question for Beth. I love the book idea. So my question is, have you had any push? I could see potential providers maybe not being that interested or engaged. So have you had any kind of pushback or skepticism, and how did you get your providers to say, hey, this is a good idea, I'm going to engage with you on this? Because I do think it would be really helpful for a lot of people to have a similar kind of diary.
Yeah, and once I started, thank you for your question, but once I started talking, and liver disease is so interactive, and I heard somebody say something before, but talking to the nurses and the ultrasound techs, your receptionist, you can get a lot of information, and all of a sudden, I started knowing that, my hepatologist is, he hangs around with my nephrologist, so I was local in a one hospital group, so that helped that they were all together. But I think that when you first can open up the idea as to my book's over there, but hey, I learned this the other day. Is that true? Kind of make them want to answer the questions and say yes, and then they'll get on board. And then also, I just said, listen, I'm going to want to read this later and to look back at it later. Can you help me understand that? One other point I did not make before was when you do have somebody or a caregiver at your appointment with you, they can be taking notes and writing the notes, and that's also helping them know about your care. So pushback, it's gonna come, it did come, and a lot of times if I had a couple of physicians that were pushing back, I would make my notes on the side and then enter them to the book later. And then eventually sometimes I would have to go back to that physician with something that I had written in the book.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I also, I'm a caregiver, I'm a patient, a cardiac patient, but I also use the notes feature on my phone, and I put all of my notes in there, and my cardiologist will just take it right out of my hands and read it, similar to what you were talking about with your notebook. But, before the cell phone, when I was doing everything with my daughter, and she was a complicated patient, not just Hep B, but other things going on, I was really, very OCD about keeping track of all the records, and I had everything kept together there, and it really helped that journey. And I found out, because I was so organized with all of it, I got a lot of additional information in other areas and could help. They would ask for something, and I would, there are those labs, and I'd have them all, we'd put them out on Excel spreadsheets, all the labs, so they could just look at them at one point, like for a year's worth of labs.
And
just
then
see
they
them all
tell
in
you,
one
oh,
place.
great, you did some great analysis work for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, or you go to a really important visit and you don't have your labs, they don't have all their stuff. It's a little bit different now, of course, because they can pull it up on the computer, but things do go wrong. Sometimes they can't get in there.
Yeah.
You go in there with your labs. I think it's a great piece of advice to have all that with you.
Right,
I
that,
think most-
and
yeah.
thank you, and, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think most physicians actually appreciate having a patient that invested. And like you're saying, sometimes I can't get into the computer and they're like, oh, and I'm like, oh, good, thanks, you have your labs. And
It's
so
more
don't ever
intimate.
feel bad about being organized, I think.
It's more intimate. You can actually ask the questions in your language, the way that you're going to understand it. And, it's looking back now, it's funny to look when I first started making my notes and now looking at them, now that I'm actually going back and looking at them for something like this, but the buy-in for the physician is actually, it's your advocacy. That's where you need to make sure that your voice, that they hear you and they know you're coming and that you're not going to change the way you're asking.
And by the way, on this same subject, we have an amazing volunteer, Don from Cincinnati. Hi, Don, and you are just firing off all kinds of questions, but you said the person, the caregiver, the person with you in the appointment should be grabbing a lot of these notes, and that's a very, very good point, and I think we referenced it, but I wanted to acknowledge, Don, that you've reached out. We've also have somebody else in the audience.
Hi, I'm Kathy Jackson. I'm a nurse, but I'm also working advocacy for one of the companies, Mallinckrodt. I thank you. First of all, you're sharing your story is so inspiring, so thank you. But also I'd like to know, how do we get this information to patients and caregivers? I just never even thought about recording the session. I'm a nurse. I never thought about recording the session, right? And I think that's brilliant. When my mom was having cancer and she was in her 80s and she really could only capture a little bit, and I wish I had thought of that. Love the notebook. I love taking care of caregivers because I think caregivers need to take care, we need to be really loving on them as well. How do we get this information out? Where do you think, as you were starting your journey, what would have been helpful, and how do you think we can do a better job in the community of educating patients and caregivers on this? Because it's brilliant. Thank you.
When we went to our first appointments and I could see that my grandmother couldn't absorb the information, I started, I would write it down, and then she was a nurse too, so she already, pretty much understood it, but then when they said the big word cirrhosis and end stage, that's kind of when she just shut down. So typically about 2 weeks after the appointments, we'd sit down in a calm setting, and then she could really absorb the information. It just came to me. It's a blessing. And now with cell phones, I do the same thing for my mom. I just put my cell phone on record and I face it down so it's not recording the physician, and we can go back and listen to it. And then, you know, there's a lot of other, like my mom's husband, he can never hardly attend due to his work schedule. So then they take that video, they re-listen to it, they talk about it. And so I find that very helpful. And it also allows you to, you know, stop, push pause. If you don't know what something means, Google it real quick so you can, you know, break it down for yourself. It is unfortunate that you have to do that, you know, because you know, nothing against physicians, but they do.
We're rushed.
They're rushed. They do have 20 minutes, so they shoot it out there. They hope you understand it, and then they follow up with labs and everything like that. But I think the biggest thing is helping the patient understand it. It is their care, and they should be in charge of it. So that's why I was always very detrimental. If my grandma would have said, you know, I don't want to take Xifaxan, I don't want to do anything, that's what we would have done. And because I'm very, you know, I was a caregiver for both of my grandparents. My grandfather was on dialysis, same thing with that. If he would have said, you know, I want to stop dialysis, you have to facilitate making their wishes possible. And so it is a hard question to say, how do you get that information out there? All I do is I just tell anybody that'll listen.
Yeah.
That's really what you can do. I'm on a lot of Facebook, you know, sites for my different organizations, and that's another thing. Like, people just share all this helpful information, and then I want everybody to open up and just share their stories, share what we can do as caregivers, and I think that would really help everybody because it is very limited. People don't have, and a lot of times people don't have somebody to help them. You know, they're in there by themselves, so.
One thing that I do, especially since I started out with the alcohol problem, is that, you know, I've started mentoring people because when you hear, there's not a lot of us out there that are the alcoholics that want to talk about having the liver disease and the liver transplant. But I like to create checklists for people that I mentor. And these are the things that you're going to need to do. On that checklist, I have get a notebook. And, you know, one of my best friends, her mother was going through ovarian cancer a couple weeks back, and she said, I got a notebook for that, and it worked too. I'm like, well, great. We are cross-diseasing now, you know. So yeah, it's just mentoring checklist and things like that. I want to try and get something into the transplant clinics that kind of explain this process of yourself, your advocacy, your book.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea to have something that you can give to patients that then they can like take their time at home to kind of slowly go through. And for breast cancer, I know when I was diagnosed, they handed me this really fat book, and I honestly didn't look at it until like a week before surgery, and I was flipping through. I was like, this is actually really good, and it was like, before your surgery, pack this and this, arrange childcare. You know, it was just like, my doctor's not going to tell me to do that, right? Like, we're focused on the medical part, but then you as a patient, you have to deal with living with the disease every single day part, right? And that's a huge part of living with the disease, right? And that's where I think other patients really help each other. And also friends, like I think I had to learn to lean on people and ask for help, which we all hate doing. But people want to help you. So one of my fellow doctors, who I know is really busy, she offered to go to all my appointments with me because my husband couldn't. And she was actually way better because she was a physician too, and she knew and before we would go into appointment, she would say, Sue, what are your most important questions? Which questions do you definitely want answered? And she was good because even me as a physician, I would feel sheepish asking my plastic surgeon about XYZ because I would feel like, oh, I should know this answer, or like, oh, maybe it's not that important to ask this. And she said, no, if that's important to you, we're going to make sure that question is asked. So
and they come in all forms.
Yeah.
Because people do want to help you. And if that means accepting that chicken casserole that they brought to your front door,
yes,
you know, do
so
that
nice.
as well too.
Okay, I'm back to Ryan and his questions. Thanks for being so patient, Ryan. For Dr. Wang, how does a patient get a copy of their medical record to keep in their file?
Oh, so you just go to you fill out a form, and every hospital has its own medical record department, and you can get it. And nowadays, there's a patient portal. Almost every hospital system, as long as they're an EMR, there's a patient portal you should sign up for. I mean, I don't care what you care about, like patient privacy, but this is your information. You can get it on your phone. Epic has it. I tell every patient this is the best thing you could do for yourself. You know, everybody's annoyed by another password, but this is actually really important for you to have access. The problem is like the patient portals don't talk across each other, so I do think sometimes the paper is still better if you're going to different hospital systems. And also it doesn't always look pretty. So I have some patients that are really impressive and do the spreadsheet, and I'll look at them like, wow, you are like A+ patient, like. But it's so amazing because then they can see their stuff from 10 years ago.
That's how I tracked my
Did you?
liver numbers.
Easy.
Exactly. And you can, I was able to go back and get my information because we had Aflac supplemental cancer insurance. So after I was ill, I was able to go back into the patient portal and track everything back to 2014. And I'm talking, lab results from there. Now, some of them are not contained where you can get them right online. You have to request it to be downloaded. But most hospitals and even, clinics, like the urgent care around me, has a little thing that you can sign up for and get your documents too. So definitely sign up for that.
So Sue, I have one thing that bothers me, and I'm sure it's not the same everywhere, but I have found that, as a patient and a caregiver, both, I go to the office and then I get my lab slip. I'd really like to be able to talk to the doctor after my labs come back. Then I get them and I look at them. Even when I was in the ER the one time, I'm looking through it at the bottom, it says patient has had a heart attack. And I said, well, gee, the thing here says that I just had a heart attack. Oh, well, I was doing my job, really. You didn't have a heart attack. I said, well, this is what I'm seeing. So it would be really nice to, I don't understand that system. I know there's a convenience factor, but it would be really nice to have the labs run before you got to see the patient.
Yeah, I actually do that for my patients like before their physical, I tell them if you can, get your blood work before, that way we talk about it during it. And you can ask that as a patient. You can call the office and say, I'd like to have my blood work done before. And, they'll try to get it to you. It depends, right? Every doctor's a little different, but if you can find a practice that allows you to do that. The other thing I've started doing, like you're saying, because we're just so busy, and I tell patients, I'm really sorry, but I'm just drowning in lab work that I have to review. And sometimes I don't get around to writing a letter for every patient or calling every patient. And so I've started actually booking telehealth, really short visits. That way it's blocked on my schedule. And I say, I'm going to do this. You are going to it's going to be a visit. So it's not, your insurance is going to get billed. So I have to let them know that. And then we can do it on telehealth. I do a share screen, and then we can go over it together. And I offer it to them. I say, some people are pretty savvy, and they're like, no, if everything's normal, I don't want to talk about it. Some will be like, oh yes, I'm so glad you're going to block out that time for me. And it's usually good, because it is helpful to circle back and say, this is what you should do.
Yeah, and most clinics, if they're not attached, if your primary care physician is not attached to a hospital, then they can't do the blood work, right there, and you get it done. But you could get the lab order to get that. I think that's your first task as being your own advocate, is asking your doctor if you could switch that schedule around, because I do get mine before all appointments too.
And a question? Yes.
So in the last 4 years, I was diagnosed with cirrhosis. One of the things that I've discovered is the doctors have that printed report. My doctor does, because we do studies, liver studies. Your phone will literally scan it like a PDF. And so I take those blood reports and take them to my primary doctor. And so everyone's getting the same information at the same time. I have, every 6 weeks, I have my blood reports done. Yep. And so it's just a bonus for advocate for myself.
And before I brought the book up on stage, I put it open and did this to it, and there were a bunch of spreadsheets and things like that fell out of it. And I usually do accompany it, and I've even gone as far as to say, see spreadsheet 1A, in the book, because those supplemental documents are great. And I think it's great with, because cirrhosis, it changes, very rapidly. So I think that that's a great thing that you're doing. Yeah.
Okay, and we're really out of time, but I'm going to end with one last question from Ryan to Beth.
Yes.
Beth shared a powerful story, as we all heard, and Ryan's question to Beth: Did you face stigma? Did you face stigma and judgment because your cirrhosis was caused by alcoholism? And if so, how do you handle and overcome that?
So, taking you back a little bit, I was the girl that was, following all the rules, doing everything great in church on Sundays and Wednesdays and everything. I never had my first drink till I actually turned 21 because it wasn't legal. So I got sick first in 2020, and so was able to be sick under the guise of COVID. So what happened was when I came out and I had my 1-year anniversary, that is when I wrote a big essay and posted it on Facebook and said, okay, I'm a 47-year-old female. The last time you saw a picture of me on Facebook, I looked relatively healthy, and I'm just telling you I had a liver transplant. So to stop that stigma, I actually said, I'm gonna stop it right now. I'll tell you, it was from alcohol. And by doing that, Ryan, I think that I did eliminate some of the stigmas that would come to it. But my grandmother is the secretary at the Baptist Church in Columbus, Georgia. So a lot of thought had to go into being public about it. And I did talk to my family to make sure they were okay with me going public. But instead of naysayers, I've been getting a lot of nay questioners. A lot of people that ask me questions, and that's been my one focus for my journey, is that I want to be as transparent as possible. You can ask me whatever you want to do. You want to ask me what I drank, and it's not medical advice to you at all, and it's no comparison because it's not the same. But I'm as transparent as I can be. So.
Well, I want to thank, on behalf of AASLD, for these amazing panelists for joining us, and some who flew some distance to be here, and wanted to thank my partner Ryan, who maybe you'll be able to come next year, Ryan, and thanks to all of you who joined us online and in person. This is important dialogue, and I was glad that many wondered, how do we get this out to others? And maybe there needs to be some brainstorming on how we do get this out for the greater masses, either patients, caregivers, or even physicians with a number of these suggestions that have come up today. So thank you all so much for participating.